out in the distant future. Yes, we're going to talk about IoT threats and egress filtering today on SDL. But I don't know when today is, so you'll just have to worry about that yourself. So stick around.
This is a Security Weekly production.
Welcome to Secure Digital Life. If your users are going to keep putting risky stuff on your machine, you're screwed. So Tuck can help us understand the complexity of blockchain.
I was reading through the show notes, man.
Oof. In binary, it would be 001. Who cares? But it's probably not significant anyway. Be like you're looking out through the HAL dot, like, hey, Dave.
It's like Sims, but with,
It would be like Sims.
Instead of AI, it's only.
Roger Williams University is a premier destination for cybersecurity, offering in-person and online classes designed and taught in collaboration with industry experts. Using virtual environments that simulate real-world systems, you'll solve complex cyber issues and analyze cyber threats to prepare you for in-demand jobs in this rapidly growing field. Whether you're just starting out or want to advance in the cyber profession, RWU offers degrees and coursework at all levels. Learn more at rwu.edu/cyber. Accredited by Microsoft, Cisco, NetApp, IDLE, Oracle, and EC Council, QuickStart delivers high-impact, low-cost IT training through its cognitive learning platform in multiple domains. With QuickStart, you get an ever-growing catalog of courses, self-paced courses offered through a monthly subscription, virtual classrooms offered through an annual subscription, peer-to-peer learning, mentoring, official courses, certified instructors, hands-on labs, and more. For more information, visit www.quickstart.com. Use coupon code PAUL20 to get 20% off on all cybersecurity courses. QuickStart, creating world-class technologists. Check out our on-demand material. Some of our previously recorded webcasts, including the State of Endpoint Detection and Response, are now available on demand at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Imagine that. Today, we're going to talk about fear and loathing at the Soho border and the IoT. That's right. We want to talk about all those kind of fun things and how they affect you because, they affect you. And we all love IoT so much, and we're getting all kinds of gadgets. And, pretty soon our clothes will be empowered and Wi-Fi enabled and all those kind of things. In fact, I was talking about how at some point, maybe every individual hair would end up having RFID embedded in it so they could track it, so you could tell which way your hair was moving and control it even, and make it stand up or lay down. Wouldn't that be cool if you could make an instant mohawk or something like that? I would buy that, right? Russ is going to join us now on Skype too. So hi, Russ.
Hi. Do follicles dream of electric combs?
Ooh, yes, exactly, and electric jerry curl and all that kind of fun stuff. So, but that would make a whole new marketplace for all kinds of strange things to put in your hair. And it's keep your RFID hair follicles excited and keep lubricated. So it's now they got it because.
Was it that replaced them with fiber optics? Somebody in a science fiction replaced their hair.
I could go for that, but I keep talking about drone swarms. That's one of the things I always talk about. My product idea is about drone swarms around you, so that you have all these little micro drones and they're just sort of hovering about and they keep bad things away from you. So like a mosquito comes near and here two drones go down and the thing is just blasted into oblivion, and you don't have to worry about mosquitoes, and everybody's worried about ticks. You're not getting any ticks if your drone swarm is watching for ticks and they just shoot the ticks, as they, I don't know how do ticks get on you anyway?
They crawl or jump?
I don't know.
Crawl.
I don't know. I don't know if I've ever had a tick on me, but I did have a tick on me once, but I don't know how it got there. So it was just, it was awful. That's the most horrible creature on earth. It's nothing is worse than a tick. But anyway, we want to talk about these devices and them phoning home in particular. And I called it fear and loathing at the Soho border because, if you go back and you start thinking about the Soho, so this is a small office, home office, and this is what the term that Cisco uses to describe your domicile environment. So they're not really talking about large enterprises. They're talking about equipment like you would have at home or wherever you live. And if you think about that, almost all your traffic at home is based in TCP. So, and if you don't know what that means, there's a show about it. But it really looks at the idea that, as opposed to an enterprise where we assume that we want traffic coming into our network, on the Soho side, the basic assumption that everybody has is that we block almost everything. So there's very little inbound traffic coming into your network. So you're essentially firewalled by default. I mean, I'm not saying you should just assume everything is safe, but what I am saying is that the default setting of Soho routers that you put at your border, that you connect to your cable modem or whatever, is typically got the firewall enabled by default, and it has a firewall blocking pretty much everything coming in. But I won't say it. I was going to say, I won't say it. But they don't block ACKs. So remember, when you think about TCP and a TCP daemon have a three-way handshake. And what they do is when you send out a request, so from inside your network, that means when you type whatever you type, cnn.com, and you hit enter, a request goes out to that web server. That HTTPD daemon is sitting there waiting for you, and you talk to it, and that three-way handshake happens. And the replies, so all the replies that come in are ACKs. So they have the ACK bit in the packet set. And if you want to, you can look that up. If you want to look up a TCP header, you can see where that ACK bit is. And when that ACK bit is set, and Cisco calls that established, it basically means that those packets are allowed through your Soho firewall. So that means that somebody who initiates a session from inside your realm gets ACKs back. And that means traffic comes in. And now the Soho routers don't block anything. So if the interweb is allowing somebody to reply to you, who knows what they can send? Now, theoretically, it's just ACKs from something that you initiated. But that's where the IoT stuff comes from. Right, Russ? What do you think?
No, I think that's absolutely right, and we've talked about in other episodes about that whole TCP handshake, and how you can how you become vulnerable in various instances where that handshake occurs. Right.
So let me tell you a little bit about Eternal Blue, and we've talked about Eternal Blue, and you've probably heard the term Eternal Blue a lot. Eternal Blue was an NSA tool. It got stolen by the shadow brokers, at least that's their claim, in 2017. And what it does is it uses an exploit of what is called server messaging block. And by compromising server messaging block, which some older systems are still running, some people never turned off. And again, Soho users are usually more subject to this stuff than anyone else because they don't necessarily have a security staff that's evaluating these. Eternal Blue creates a compromise which allows it to execute code. So if something sent you an ACK that had Eternal Blue attached to it, and it would be you requesting it now, it would come through. So there would be no filter to stop that. So, and again, and this, I'm not talking about now obfuscation and things like that. So I'm not talking about somebody trying to contrive this attack, which might be the case as well. But if you had a device inside your network that phoned home and requested something, all that traffic comes back. And if that traffic was infected with Eternal Blue and you were subject to Eternal Blue could compromise your machine. It could then inject Double Pulsar. Double Pulsar is a backdoor Trojan that also was released as part of the NSA theft. And if you did that, you would essentially have a backdoor Trojan sitting on your network that could accept requests from outside. And all of a sudden, there's a way that you could be compromised dramatically using Eternal Blue, Double Pulsar. And I know I'm oversimplifying that a little bit, but the idea of it is that if these IoT devices reach out to somewhere and you don't know where they're reaching out to, they could literally request inbound traffic that would set these things up on your network, and they could then, they could compromise other machines and so forth. And like I said, I'm just really trying to make a point rather than I'm trying to get a specific attack described, because I don't really want to do that. Russ, have you ever seen things like that?
No, just basically what came up over the internet maybe about 3 or 4 months ago with the SMB, where was it Eternal Blue or whatever it was that exploited SMB, and other blogs had suggested, turn off if you can, or block SMB. And so just that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, and the example I put in the show notes was if you put a Mr. Ringy doorbell, that's my fake product, Mr. Ringy, and if Mr. Ringy has a vulnerability on it, it could literally reach out from inside your network and request other things. So if that device had embedded on it already some sort of an exploit or some piece of malware that was embedded in Mr. Ringy, even though you put Mr. Ringy in and Mr. Ringy is set up just fine, your Soho firewall would block someone trying to reach Mr. Ringy because that was blocked by default. But if Mr. Ringy starts reaching out onto the internet and pulling things in, you would have no protection from that at all. I mean, it would just be going on. So one of the exploits then would be that the device contains malware from day zero. So that when you buy Mr. Ringy and you get online and you say, wow, this is so much cheaper than these other products that are out there, I'm going to buy this. And if Mr. Ringy came from the factory and it already had Eternal Blue and Double Pulsar or something on there, it could literally start taking over your internal network as soon as you activated it. So that could just jump out inside. So that's one way that you could get this problem in your house from IoT. Another way,
but Doug, you've been making that claim since the beginning of the show that wherever these manufacturers are, whether they're in America, China, Indonesia, or whatever, if they bake in a certain code into a firmware or even into software built into the device, we have no way of knowing that.
Right.
Nor do we have any way of resolving it other than just get rid of the device to be 100% sure. So I mean, I think that's really important to point out is, the advocacy that we need for getting to know more about our firmware and software.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the first time I ever heard this come up was years ago. People started talking about, do you realize that actually around Y2K, I was even hearing about stuff like this because people were talking about, what if firmware contains problems that were embedded in the firmware from day one? And people started talking about, what if the military... So what if military devices, and I'm not trying to create a whole paranoia thing here, but what if military devices had chipsets that had firmware that had malware embedded in it? And because I asked a question, where did the chipset that you're using in that tank come from? Did it come from Indiana, and somebody in Indiana made it? And I'm not being a nationalist here, because somebody in Indiana could be just as evil as somebody in a third world nation state. But where did the chipset come from? Where was it manufactured, and was it manufactured in a hostile place that had from square one was like, well, what if we built this in there? We might use it someday. A second one is that Mr. Ringy phones home. So almost every IoT device you buy now that is Wi-Fi type IoT phones home for various things. So it phones home to say, am I current? It phones home to register itself on the Mr. Ringy network. And if Mr. Ringy's corporate network located somewhere in the heart of Los Angeles, California, and yeah, that's a Rolling Stones lyric. And what if Mr. Ringy is infected? Like, not the actual IoT device, but what if the company is infected? So you don't know when these things are phoning home, and we don't have any rules or regs that say that Mr. Ringy has to tell us anything, pretty much. So if that company's been infected, they may not even know they're infected. What if it phones home and it downloads a patch, or it downloads something, and someone internally to Mr. Ringy or externally to Mr. Ringy has done that, and now there's a bad actor in the heart of Los Angeles, California, and suddenly that IoT device downloads malware, and boom, you've got another problem. So it may be sitting there doing that. Number three is another Rick and Morty reference, but that was a really subtle Rick and Morty reference. If you don't watch interdimensional TV, you won't get that. The device phones home all the time, and someone knows that it phones home all the time. So all these Mr. Ringy doorbells are out there in the world, and it phones home all the time, and someone obviously can figure that out by just buying one and watching what it does, and they pretend to be Mr. Ringy Limited. So now they somehow inject themselves in between Mr. Ringy and Mr. Ringy Limited, as a DNS poisoning attack could do, as they could just substitute an IP address, and on and on and on. So that's number three. Number four. What if you download it? So you actually download a vulnerability because you got phished, and you aren't vulnerable to that, but Mr. Ringy is. So you patched all your systems, and you're running all these different things on your network, and they're all perfectly safe, but the doorbell is not. And so now it gets infected because you downloaded a phishing attack that runs, and it doesn't do anything to you. So that was number 4. Number 5. Is it getting paranoid yet? Number 5, you don't safeguard your Wi-Fi, and some bad actor in a white van sitting outside, or a van with Rush painted on the side of it. So I'll use something besides Rick and Morty now. I'll use that's Archer. So there's a van with Rush painted on 2112 painted on the side of it out on your street, and that person is using your poor Wi-Fi network and embedding malware into your network. And again, some of it comes back to, well, all my systems are protected, but Mr. Ringy is not. So the person can jump on your network, you don't know they're on there, and and Krieger's out in the van attacking Mr. Ringy doorbells, doing that. So all those are, and I could go on to the top 10 or the top 20, or we could probably just keep going all day with all the different things that could be done. And admittedly, there's a little bit of paranoia there, but that's what we do. But it's really a tricky problem for Soho users, because unless you want to build a SOC and hire some staff to put on site, and or maybe hire a third-party company to monitor your home network, which we may get there. I'm wondering if that's like maybe a 5-year out kind of business, is that we now provide SOC services to end users instead of just big companies, because you have so much stuff in your network that needs to be monitored. And so if you do this, donate money to me. I'll give you my address and my mother's maiden name in just a minute, so stay tuned. So stuff that you should do then. So to get to the point, one of the things that I really encourage people to do is learn how your Soho device works. We saw this recently with this VPN filter attack. You've obviously read about that, Russ?
Yep, I have. Yep.
Well, I was very frustrated with the VPN filter attack, because basically the recommendation that came out to all the end users was reboot your router. That doesn't stop VPN filter, folks. It does, it does do something, but it doesn't really help. And I asked some people why, and they said, oh, because people are too stupid to fix their routers. They couldn't patch them or replace them, and they don't even know how to figure out what router they've got. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. And so my cynicism kicked in, and I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. But the problem was that didn't really help. But you should learn how your Soho router actually works. And if you don't know how to do that, you should figure it out. You should know what kind of router you have. So get that, write it down, put it somewhere on a sheet of paper, if nothing else, and write down that I have a Netgear WRT300. That's a really old one. A WRT300, and here, here's what version it is, and all these kind of things when you buy it, because then you've got that information. But you should learn how to use it and go in and enable logging. All these Soho routers will allow you to log what's going out of and coming into your network. And you say, Doug, come on, man, geez, I don't have time to sit down all day, every day, monitoring my log. Like I know you have no life, but I actually have friends, and I do stuff. I don't just sit in my house with all my logs going on the screen going, what's that? But you do need to turn on logging, because if your logging is not even turned on, you can't even go back and look. And most of these devices do not turn on logging by default. So if you don't have the logging enabled, then even if something happens, like I've seen this, and people call me and they said, "What? Can you tell us what happened?" We went, "Oh, turn on the router," and it's like, "Well, no, you didn't have the logging turned on, so it's not there." So turn on your logging and learn a little bit about how that works. And I will tell you this about the logging on Soho routers: you can often enable them to email you the logs. So you can have them send you the log by email every so often, and you can actually get it. And the reason I want you to turn it on and look at it is because if you start getting an idea of what your network looks like, you'll start to have a better idea of what it shouldn't look like. If you have no idea, and all you ever do is your router just sits there and churns all day and all night, and the lights blink, and you go, "Ooh, look at the lights, they're blinking," and you don't have any idea, you're clueless. You're basically just plugged yourself into the world, and good luck. You may want to map out what you have, and I understand this is all onerous, But you need to map out your local network, because as you started adding, now 10 years ago, if you even had a network, you probably had one device. I have a computer. I have a gateway desktop computer, and it's plugged into something that blinks. That was probably the extent of your world. So it's pretty simple, and you kind of know what it is. Today, you have started adding so many things. Now, I did notice I bought another Soho router the other day to test out, and I saw it was actually building a map of my entire internal network and putting it up on a graphic, which was an awfully nice thing for it to do, I guess. Then I started getting paranoid about, well, who's it telling this information to? And is it phoning home and giving this up to Netgear, wherever they are? But you should start to map out your local network. And you can do this on a piece of paper. You don't have to go buy a $10,000 tool to do this for you. It doesn't even have to look pretty. You can draw it with a pencil, and it can be ugly. But what's in your network? I mean, if you sit down and look, do you have TiVos? Well, guess what? TiVos are network enabled, and they really don't work if they're not. And they phone home every day. They call in and get updates and downloads. Where are your TiVos, if you have, or any other kind of DVRs? So you have DVRs scattered around your property. What are they? What model are they? What's their MAC address? Do you know? Well, you can find out. But what's their IP addresses? And you should start to get a feel for that as you add these IoT things. So now you've added Mr. Ringy as a doorbell, and you got Mr. Ringy 2, the camera on the back porch. All those are now network devices, and they're talking, and they're collecting information, and they have to be patched and updated and all these things. Do you actually know what's out there? Now you got Wi-Fi users. You've got phones. I don't even know what all you've got. You've got sex toys. We've seen that, I know, I said it. I went there. Yeah. And
Toothbrushes.
Edit me. Bring it. Turn that beep on. But listen, whatever you've got, I don't care what you have. You may have a weather station. You may have all kinds of totally vanilla, bland things. Plumbuses. Rick and Morty. If you don't know what a plumbus is, look it up. I don't know what it is, and I've seen it, but it's interesting. But you really need to start getting a feel for this, because it's going to get out of hand fast. And the next thing you know, you've got PlayStations. You've got Wii's, you've got DVRs, you've got Mr. Ringy doorbells, you've got cameras. I saw a thing the other day where you could talk to your pet. From your phone, you could actually light up a screen that was down at floor level and talk to your pets and go, "Hi, pets." And this one, even you could trigger it to give them a treat remotely. I was like, maybe you don't need. I know. I'm sorry. I'm not going to be judgmental. I was like, maybe you shouldn't have a pet, but I
had a fish feeder that did that in my office.
Well, that's true. Russ is a fish feeder. All these things are network enabled. So do you even know where they are or what? Because we get this automated crap. Russ is turning his camera around to show us. God knows what we're going to see. But that's one thing. So schedule some time to review those devices and start to see what's there. I mean, log into them if you can. If you can't, go look at the bottom of them, and they all have a plate on them, and it's probably got the MAC address at least. And make some notes and start putting that in your collection of things about your local network, because your network's gotten awfully complicated, and it's going to get worse because you're going to keep adding things. You're going to add thermostats. You're going to add drone swarms. You're going to add who knows what. I want some bat drones that fly around my house at night, and it is, if somebody comes on the property, it's like, okay, that's it for you. And then, but all that's coming, and it's mostly here, but it's getting worse all the time. So you may want to egress filter those devices. And what I mean by egress filtering is you can actually restrict the ability of those devices to phone home. Now, here's the bad news. That may not work. The device itself may not be functional unless it can phone home, like, say, a TiVo. But if you at least know what should be going on, you can start to restrict and understand what is going on. Because if you just look at the world and it's just this big pit of chaos, like this big swarming pit of things thrashing, I don't know what's happening. All I know, Russ is trying to make that gesture too. I think that means something offensive in Greece, but that one. Yeah, that's a good way to get punched in the face. But if you don't know what that big festering swarming pit is that's inside your network, you will have no idea what's going on, and you'll just see all this traffic and you don't know what it means. And you need to start getting a handle on that, because as it gets more complicated, you're going to be more at risk. Every time you add a device that you don't fully understand, and most of us are never going to understand all those devices. I don't care how good you are. It's going to take too much time and be too big of an effort to say, oh, I just went and bought the brand new Linksys drone swarm and enabled it. And it came in a box, and you push a button and the box like opened and it was glowing inside, and all these little things fly out of it and go swarming all over your house and go, hi, Doug, we're welcome to the new Linksys drone swarm. We are here to serve you. Keeping summer safe. Another Rick and Morty. It's Rick and Morty Day, sorry. But you can control that with some egress filtering. It's also possible to use proxy servers to do this. So have you ever set up a proxy server, Russ?
Yeah, a long time ago. It had to do with web filtering or something like that. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, exactly. So the early days of proxy filtering were things like NetNanny. So NetNanny was this early product that came about that people were putting in place that just basically filtered certain IP addresses, or parents could sit down and say, this will keep Johnny safe from that awful pornography. Yeah, it doesn't work, because Johnny already knows how to get around NetNanny. But we saw proxy servers start sort of in that realm, or enterprises started using them to filter broader spectrums of things. And certainly it's good to filter certain websites. I mean, just being able to filter at that level. But with a proxy server, you could conceivably also then see what all these devices are communicating to. So the proxy server acts as a filter between you and the internet on that outbound direction. So that means if you have a new Mr. Ringy doorbell and Mr. Ringy starts trying to talk to all these different IP addresses, you could see that in the log of your proxy server. And you may, they're not that hard to set up. You can use an old machine to do that. One of the ones I used to build all the time was called Dan's Guardian. I put a link to Tech Republic article about content filters on the website. But, all those things have censorship components to them, which is fine in this context, because if you don't want your kids to see, pornographic sites, you can, good luck with that. But you can go in and specifically block certain kinds of traffic, regardless of what type of traffic it is. So you can just literally go in and by IP address or by device, block those things going out into the world. And that's another way you can flag strange things. And I set up Dan's Guardian a lot for some schools. I set up Dan's Guardian for some enterprises. But Dan's Guardian's pretty much free. So you can download it, you can set it up and play with it to your heart's content and learn how it works and set that up. The other piece of this is IDS. And IDS is a little more complicated than some of this other stuff that we were talking about, because as a tool, IDS, and remember, intrusion detection systems range from very, very simplistic things to very expensive, very complex things. And there's many, many companies that are selling IDS, IPS type stuff. There's all kinds of special purpose tools for all this, but mostly they cost too much. But you can get IDSs that you can put in your home network. They take a little bit of learning on your part. Snort is one of my that I always advocate, and Snort is pretty much free. There's some fees associated with getting the database updated every day, but it's really cheap compared to most of the stuff. And it's a pretty fun thing to learn to set up. You could take an older machine that either has two NICs in it, so if it's got two NICs, you got an in and an out, or you can actually do what's called mirroring spanning, and you can span with some smart switches. You can also span by using a hub. So you can just you can buy a little cheapo hub for $5 and plug the Snort box in there. And Snort actually uses all these rules that they allow, and you can tweak it. So this is called tuning of an IDS. You can sit down and tweak this looking for hostile traffic. And that doesn't really keep your devices from phoning home, but it also means you kind of know what's going on, and you start to see that traffic. So Snort and Snorby is two things, and there's other different GUIs you can bolt on the front of Snort to make it easier to manage. It takes some learning. So don't get frustrated, but you can sit down and you can play with it a little bit and have some fun and learn how to do something impressive. I guess my last point on that is really know before you install IoT devices. IoT is very frightening to me, but it's also, I love it. I mean, I can't stand. I know Russ loves it, and I mean he loves IoT stuff. He's an even earlier adopter than I am. I'm sort of a late early adopter. He's like, on the cutting edge, and he's got embedded corneal implants already, and I'm waiting until to see if he goes blind. I figured I'd give you 2 years, and if your eyes don't rot and fall out of your head, and then you end up with those big bug eye like bolt-ons, although that'd be cool too. I could go for that. But I mean, you may want to do a little research before you put an IoT device in your network. What I typically do is if I'm going to buy something, so if I'm looking at a Nest thermostat, I usually start Googling exploits with, how to exploit Nest thermostats. And I start reading, and if everything I'm reading looks incredibly esoteric, like, some kid was able, with a soldering iron and a ball bat and, like night vision goggles, was able to slowly get into this like factory and manipulate a Nest thermostat, I'm not as worried about that. But on the other hand, if I get 8,000 hits immediately of, use this toolkit and that toolkit, and here's a way to exploit those, and all you really have to do is just type this, and the whole thing, is wide open, I might consider a different brand. I'm not criticizing Nest because I nothing real there, but you really want to be careful about what you're going to put in your network before it ends up taking over and all your family photos get hacked on your NAS and distributed or something like that. Because remember, when you put these devices in your network, you are not behind a firewall anymore. They are inside your network. And for a long time, people said, I don't need to worry about firewalling my individual machines because I have a firewall sitting at the border. But today, you're going to bring that device in, you're going to put it in your network, it's going to immediately phone home. It may phone someone else. It may have malware on it. I put all those points up there. So as you're going to add these things, be very careful and do a little bit of research, because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to fall into this trap of the less you know. Russ, I don't. Do you have a strategy for this?
No, I mean, I think a lot of what you've said already is important. I think what I like to tell students in classes like IoT and stuff like that is, it's important for you to establish, like you've suggested, this sort of map of your network. I would say, get the MAC address of all your devices, even though it's a cumbersome task. Write it down in Excel or even on a piece of paper. And then I would even go so far as to say assign static IPs to the devices that you can assign statics to, so you know what the traffic is that's going in, coming in and going out from those devices. And also, on that sheet, I would put the port numbers that the manufacturers are saying, either TCP, UDP, potentially. Put those down so that you know what ports should have what activity going through them, just to stay informed. Like
I agree. So you're basically starting to act like a SOC yourself. So the Security Operations Center on your own network means that you know that fridge that you bought it's keeping track of your eggs in it. As it is how it's doing that and what that traffic looks like. Because if you don't know those things, you're basically just looking at a big seething snake pit, and you've jumped in the middle of the snake pit, and you don't know how many of those snakes in there are poisonous and how many are harmless, and and how many are alive and dead, and how long you're going to live. So keep an eye on that. Anyway, as we run out of time, any other comments about this, Russ?
No, I think this is one of my favorite topics, as you know. And so I just, stay informed, stay vigilant, and practice safe computing.
The more you know. So thanks for joining us with our rapid discussion of a very complex topic of IoT. And we'll see you some other time on Secure Digital Life. Thanks, Roz.